Good morning. This morning's scripture reading will be from Luke chapter 10, verse 38 to 42. And that's Luke chapter 10, verse 38 to 42. And I'll be reading for the ESV version. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her."
Thank you, Clark, and thank you, Hank, for that message this morning. Before we begin this morning, I want to do a couple of things. One is, two of them are going to be good news. One is just a reflection on some recent events. On Monday of last week, our nation hit another dark moment in our history where the number of people killed by the coronavirus reached over 500,000. One of the things I have to keep reminding myself of as these numbers come out is that these numbers aren't numbers. These are people. And these people had friends and siblings and spouses and other loved ones. And this virus has affected all of us in different ways. Some of us have lost loved ones, and some of us' lives are just generally disrupted because of it. But just a reminder in these dark times that we as the Lord's people have a hope to offer to people that the rest of the world does not. On a lighter note, you may have noticed the paintings in the lobby. One of the things I did at the beginning of the year was ask our students to create art to reflect the theme of our congregation this year, which is the Family of God, and the name of it is the Family of God Art Project. I've still got some submissions coming in. If you are interested in participating in this, let me know. We will find a space for you in our gallery out there, so that we can continue to do that as well. Because the theme of the year is the Family of God, and as I said earlier, this is one of those good news things that we have for people, is there's a community and a family that people can participate in. And finally, the other kind of good news is last night we had our second night of Winterfest 2021, Winterfest Falls Church, Homestyle, Mini Winterfest. It gets a bunch of different names. 20 students had registered to participate over the weekend. We've got one more session tonight, and that's the same number of students that went on the trip last year. So that was very encouraging to see. And over these sessions, the theme has been truth. And we've talked about who is the truth, how do we understand truth, and how we can see the truth of what we believe. And it's been really encouraging to see. And we met in here last night, and just so that you know, that's why the tape is a little different. We offset the pews. So the pews that normally aren't sat in, that have remained empty for almost a year, some of them got sat in last night. So that was a good thing. And we will continue to do that tonight, our last session. Probably not in the front yard with the rain, but we'll probably be in here tonight for that. I want to return this morning to my On Again, Off Again series on the meals of Jesus. Just a quick reminder, what this is anytime Jesus eats, or food is involved, or food is offered to him, or he's receiving service, and there's a couple of these where he doesn't eat, but he should. As far as I can tell, there are about 22 unique meal stories of Jesus. And for those of you who are Bible nerds like me, that's one of those things we look for. How many of these are there? Luke has 11 of these, so that's almost half of them. They're not really unique to Luke. If you want all the stats on that, let me know, and I'll email it to you. So it's no surprise that we find ourselves in Luke talking about a meal. And not only is this story about a meal, this story is about siblings. And in some ways, this story is a little subversive for the first century. And I'll touch base on that as we go. We don't notice it because of our culture today, but there are some things in it that you would not expect in the first century. As I mentioned at the beginning, this story is about siblings. And in the Bible, typically when we meet siblings, that means trouble is around the corner. It starts with Cain and Abel, which is literally a deadly conflict between brothers over an offering to the Lord. And this story is also about offerings, the Martha and Mary story. We'll come back and see a couple parallels to Cain and Abel. No one gets killed, spoiler alert, in Martha and Mary for that one. And then we hit Isaac and Ishmael. And this is a conflict over inheritance. Who is going to be the chosen one? Is it going to be Isaac or is it going to be Ishmael? Then we hit Jacob and Esau, and that's a conflict and some jealousy. Jealousy is going to start becoming a theme in this. This is a conflict over who gets the father's blessing. Who is the one that's going to be the blessed son? That brings us to Rachel and Leah, who is our first siblings, first set of sisters. And this is conflict over a husband's attention, a husband's love. The husband has a favorite wife, but Leah, that's Rachel, and Leah wants his attention as well. And we see that what they do between each other, the conflict between the two of them to get Jacob's attention. Then we find Joseph and his 11 brothers. This is another, they may have assumed it was deadly. They don't know the outcome of Joseph till much later in their story. But this is, again, is jealousy. This is multi-generational jealousy, actually, because Joseph is the son of Rachel, who is the favored wife of Jacob, and the other boys are not, except for Benjamin, but he's younger. And so not only are they jealous of the attention that Jacob is getting, they're jealous of the attention that Joseph is getting. They're jealous of the attention that Joseph's mother is getting from their father. That leads to him being sold off into slavery, although their initial desire was just to kill him. Another kind of deadly sibling conflict. Aaron, Miriam, and Moses have conflict with each other over who has and who does not have the Lord's favor. Hophni and Phinehas aren't necessarily in conflict with each other. This is later when the people are in the promised land, and Hophni and Phinehas are the sons of the high priest, if you're not familiar with the story. The Lord is angry with them because they are literally keeping people from worshiping the Lord the way they're supposed to. They're interrupting the sacrifice, and they're having affairs with the women who help run the tabernacle. And they end up dying because the Lord kills them in a battle with the Philistines. Then we get to Absalom and Amnon, which is a deadly conflict over the rape of their sister or half-sister Tamar. This is in David's family. We get the whole story of how Absalom plots to kill Amnon because of the way he treated his sister. As we move into the New Testament, the pattern kind of changes. So we get Peter and Andrew is our first set of siblings. And Peter and Andrew don't have this kind of conflict. In fact, Andrew is the one that brings Peter to meet Jesus. And then we have James and John, who are the sons of thunder. They don't have conflict with each other. They're just kind of out there to cause trouble sometimes. And then we get Jesus and his siblings, two of whom we know, James and Jude. And we know from the gospel accounts that Jesus' family weren't all believers in Jesus as the Messiah while he was doing what we call the earthly ministry, while he's walking amongst us and teaching and preaching. It's only till later that they start to believe, that James and Jude and his other siblings believe. And we can understand that, right? If we've got an older sibling, we might think if the older sibling suddenly declared that he was the Son of God, we might be a little skeptical of that. So, and then we get to Martha and Mary, who are our subject of the story today. And this is really where I want to focus. We see all those siblings, and now we get to this one, and we have some expectations for this. So Mary and Martha, or Martha and Mary, they have a brother named Lazarus. And we first meet them here in Luke 10, but we will meet them again later in John 11 and 12. John 11 is where Lazarus dies, and Jesus comes and resurrects him, and we have that whole story between Jesus, Lazarus, Martha, and Mary. And then John 12, which we will circle back around to this morning and later in the series, where Martha opens her home again to Jesus and his disciples. But there's something interesting going on there that we need to touch on this morning, but also that we'll touch on when we get there later in the series. And I feel because of the way they're mentioned in a couple of Gospels here, that this is an important family to Jesus. We don't know their exact relationship, but we know that they're important enough that Jesus goes to them when Lazarus dies, and then is again hosted by them. So just kind of quick recap of the story. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. This is a part of Luke called the travel narrative. He's going from Galilee, and he's on his way to Jerusalem. And he gets to where Martha lives, and she invites him into her home. That's an important element of the story, that it's her home. And then she starts serving him. But her sister is not helping with the servicey stuff. She's sitting at Jesus' feet listening to him teach. And that's another important point we're going to get to. And Martha gets upset because she should be helping her get ready in the house. And so she goes, asks Jesus to tell Mary what to do, and Jesus is like, no. You are distracted by things. There's only one thing that needs to be done right now. So there's a couple of things, at least three things that I noticed from this story. Things that stand out to me that we today don't necessarily find different, but in the first century they might, but also that are important for us today. So the first thing I noticed, or that stands out, is Martha is offering her hospitality. Remember I said there are parallels between Cain and Abel making an offering to the Lord, and in this we're going to see that Martha and Mary make an offering to the Lord. Martha is offering her hospitality. Jesus and his disciples are invited to Martha's house. Not Martha's husband's house, not Martha's father's house, not Lazarus, their brother's house. This is Martha's house. Martha is a woman who owns a house. This is unusual in the first century, especially in Jewish culture, for a woman to own a house. And as far as I can tell, Martha's the only woman to open her home that we have an account of to Jesus. Which makes this story, like I said earlier, a little subversive. Luke is making a point, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. Martha's hospitality parallels the kind of hospitality Jesus tells the 72 to be looking for. Earlier in this chapter, starting in verse 5, Jesus is sending out 72 of his disciples to go and spread this good news about Jesus. Prepare the way of the people that Jesus is coming, so they're not surprised when he shows up. And he tells them, when you get to a town, if you're offered hospitality, take it. Don't go from house to house trying to find the best place. Take what you get. And this parallels what Martha is doing for Jesus here. And so that's the first thing I notice, is that Martha is opening her home to Jesus as an offering to him. The second thing I notice is that both of these women are making an offering. Martha offers her home, but Mary is offering her attention to Jesus. Martha is worried and upset about and distracted by all of the preparation for Jesus, when Jesus is right there. She's worried about doing all of the things to serve Jesus while Jesus is there. And the problem here isn't that she's wanting to offer him service, that she isn't wanting to feed him and take care of him and his disciples. The problem is timing. The timing is off. Martha is offering her attention at the right time. Mary is offering her attention at the right time. Martha is offering her service at the wrong time. They both need to be done at the right time. There is a time to be still and to listen to Jesus, and there is a time to go out and do Jesus things. And this happens to all of us. All of us get distracted, caught up doing the Jesus things. When we forget to stop and hear, we forget to stop and listen to what Jesus has to say. More than likely, we get all wrapped up in doing the churchy things, and we forget and get distracted by Jesus at the heart of those things. And we end up like Martha, full of anxiety and distracted, but we need to listen to Jesus, listen to what he has to say. This is another one of those parallels between Cain and Abel and Martha and Mary. Cain and Abel make an offering. The Lord accepts one, doesn't accept the other. The Lord talks to Cain, says, Cain, be careful, sin is at your door. Cain doesn't listen to the Lord. Mary and Martha are making offerings. The Lord accepts one, doesn't accept the other because of the timing, and talks to Martha about what is needed. But we'll talk about this here in a little bit. We don't get the conclusion of the story. The third thing I notice has to do specifically with Mary. Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet listening with the other disciples. She is sitting in what is, in Jewish, at that time, a specifically male space. Women were not allowed in this space. And we don't necessarily notice this because as followers of Jesus, we accept that men and women and learn and serve together. In fact, if you were part of our Bible study this morning about, an hour and a half ago, you would have heard and seen men and women studying the Bible together, learning together, sitting at Jesus' feet. Now John isn't Jesus, even though he taught the class, but what he was teaching points us in that direction of Jesus and being a disciple. And we had children, we had women, and we had men participating in that class. Now, in the first century, you would not have found that in this setting. Rabbis and teachers of the law, like Jesus, did not take women as disciples, only young men. And not just any men. They took the best of the best of the best, the smartest of the smartest of the smartest. And everyone else just got a regular job. But Jesus breaks these norms all the time. We find him speaking with Samaritan women, which is something rabbis did not do. Jewish people just kind of avoided Samaritans as best they could. Jewish rabbis did not interact with Samaritans. We find Jesus teaching not only Samaritans in general, but Gentiles as well. He touches lepers and other unclean people. And following Jesus' ministry, and as we go through Luke and Acts and the rest of the New Testament, we find that Gentiles, Samaritans, free, slaves, Ethiopians, Romans, Greeks, men and women are all called to sit at Jesus' feet with us today and learn. And Luke has a special theme. If you read Luke Acts, which if you don't know, they're parts 1 and 2 of a thing that Luke writes, you see that this openness of the gospel to everyone is an important theme that he has. And in fact, this story is in the middle of a section on discipleship. This conversation that Jesus is having with his disciples and us about what it means to be a disciple, is in the middle of it. And it starts earlier in chapter 10, actually at the end of chapter 9, with a warning what to count the cost to follow Jesus. That following Jesus cost us something. Then he sends out the 72, and the story of the Good Samaritan is immediately before this one. Almost like kind of parallel stories, where we got a story when it's time to sit and listen, and a story when it's time to go out and do. So Mary, like us, is called to sit at Jesus' feet as one of his disciples. It's not closed to people, it's open to all. It's that part of that good news I was talking about. So what do we do with this story? Because this is important. First, we pay attention to our timing. Sometimes there is time to be a doer, to do, for lack of a better word, the Jesus things, and sometimes there's time to be a listener and listen to the Jesus things, to learn, because that helps us know what to do. The second thing we need to keep in mind is don't get distracted. When you're out there doing Jesus' work, being the hands and feet of Jesus, don't forget that sometimes you need to sit down and listen to what Jesus has to say so you know what to do. And when you sit down and listen to what Jesus has to say, don't get distracted and not do what Jesus calls us to do. They go hand in hand, doing and listening. And finally, that idea of discipleship being open to all, it's been that way from the beginning and is that way to the end. In fact, Jesus' earliest disciples had been rejected by other rabbis, and we know this because they have regular jobs. They're fishermen. If you have a regular job, you are not a disciple of a rabbi. You would literally be following your rabbi wherever he went. That's why the disciples are all following Jesus, literally following Jesus where he goes. That's what disciples of rabbis did. And so this discipleship that Jesus offers us is open to everyone. And we need the wisdom to hear that and to pay attention to the timing of whether it's time to be a disciple that's listening or a disciple that's doing. And before I finish, I want to circle back around to the conclusion of this story. This is, like I said earlier, this is a subversive little story. It does one more odd thing. It doesn't end. It doesn't have a conclusion. It's open-ended. It ends with Jesus talking to Martha, but we don't know what happens to those two sisters. Unlike Cain and Abel, where we know there's a murder that's involved, we don't know the end of the story. But I think John gives us an end to the story. In John chapter 12, verses 1 through 11, we find that Jesus is reached the town of Bethany, which is just outside Jerusalem. Once again, Martha is offering her hospitality to Jesus. Once again, Mary is at Jesus' feet. But things are different. Martha is preparing a meal for Jesus like she did in this story. And Martha is literally washing Jesus' feet with some very expensive perfume. But what we don't find is that Martha doesn't ask Jesus to tell Mary to help her in the kitchen, getting ready all the preparations. And Mary doesn't ask Jesus to tell Martha to come help her wash his feet. Somewhere and somehow off camera, they resolved their conflict with each other. And they learned to be together. They put that conflict they had aside, and they learned to be Jesus' disciples together. And I think that's a beautiful way to end this story, to see that two disciples who had a conflict resolved it, but also all of those things for us, to pay attention to our timing, to remember that discipleship is open for everyone, and don't get distracted.